I remember the day like it was yesterday, though it's been years since the shadows of our family's past crept into my life. Back in 2011, I was just a typical high schooler living in a quiet suburb of the United States. My life was ordinary, filled with the mundane routine of school, friends, and family. My parents, Emily and John, were loving but often preoccupied with their work. Dad was a local mechanic, known for his skill and honesty. Mom, a school teacher, had a passion for shaping young minds. We lived in my grandparents' old house, a quaint two-story building with an attic that always intrigued me. Grandma and Grandpa had passed away before I could forge any real memories with them. All I knew were the stories my parents told. Grandpa, a stern but kind man, and Grandma, a gentle soul with a love for gardening. Their presence was still felt in the house, especially in the old photographs adorning our living room walls. My childhood was filled with laughter and warmth. I had a younger sister, Lily, who was the apple of my eye. We shared a bond that was unbreakable, playing in the backyard, riding bikes, and exploring every nook and cranny of our home. Our favorite spot was the old oak tree, where we'd imagine grand adventures and secret worlds. As I grew older, I became more curious about my grandparents. There was an air of mystery surrounding them, something unspoken yet palpable. My parents would often deflect my questions with vague answers, instilling in me a sense of intrigue and, admittedly, a bit of frustration. One summer day, driven by this curiosity and a bit of teenage rebellion, I decided to explore the attic. It was a place off limits to us kids, a dusty, forgotten realm filled with old furniture and boxes of memories. Climbing the creaky steps, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. The attic was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of age and secrets. As my eyes adjusted, I spotted an old chest tucked away in the corner. It was a relic from another time, worn but still elegant. With a pounding heart, I opened the chest. Inside, I found a myriad of items, old clothes, trinkets, and at the very bottom, a leather-bound diary. It was Grandpa's, his name etched on the cover in faded gold letters. Flipping through the pages, I was immediately drawn into a world I never knew existed. The diary was filled with confessions, a detailed account of a life so vastly different from the man I thought I knew. Grandpa was a spy during the war, involved in a web of espionage, betrayal, and dark secrets. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My family, the peaceful, loving unit I cherished, was built on a foundation of lies and hidden truths. The man I knew as a kind-hearted grandfather was a figure shrouded in moral ambiguity and haunting past deeds. That day, the innocence of my youth shattered. I was left with a burning need to uncover the full extent of my grandparents' secret life and its impact on our family. Little did I know, this discovery was just the tip of the iceberg, and the horrors that lay ahead would change my life forever. Clutching the diary, my heart raced with a mix of fear and curiosity. As I delved deeper into its pages, the air in the attic seemed to grow colder, heavier. The words of my grandfather painted a picture so starkly different from the stories I had been told. He was not just a spy. He was a man torn between duty and darkness. The entries were detailed, recounting covert operations during a tumultuous time in history. But it was the personal confessions that shook me to my core. Grandpa wrote of betrayals, acts of espionage that led to the downfall of many. He detailed secret meetings, coded messages, and the weight of decisions that cost lives. One entry, in particular, stood out. It was dated April 1945 in a small town in Germany. Grandpa had been involved in an operation that led to the capture of a high-ranking enemy official. The success of the mission was celebrated, but the cost was high. Innocent lives were lost due to a misjudgment on his part. As I read, the gravity of his actions began to sink in. These weren't just historical events, they were personal tragedies, directly connected to my family. I wondered if my parents knew, if this was the reason for the hushed tones and veiled references to the past. The more I read, the more I realized that my grandparents' lives were a web of secrets, each more disturbing than the last. Grandpa's words were filled with regret, a sense of guilt that seemed to permeate through the pages. He spoke of the toll his double life took on his family, especially on Grandma. She knew of his deeds and lived in constant fear and anxiety, her garden being her only solace from the turmoil. It was then I stumbled upon a newspaper clipping tucked between the pages. The headline read, "Tragic explosion in local factory, several dead." The date and location matched one of Grandpa's operations. The article detailed the accidental deaths of factory workers caught in the crossfire of espionage. My hands trembled as I pieced together the horrific truth. My grandfather, the man I had revered, was responsible for innocent lives lost. This revelation was a grotesque contrast to the grandfather I thought I knew, a man who loved his garden, who played chess on Sundays, who smiled kindly in old photographs. I sat there for what seemed like hours, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of my discovery. The shadows of the attic felt like they were closing in on me, the echoes of a past long hidden now screaming in my ears. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the attic, I knew I couldn't keep this to myself. I had to confront my parents to uncover the full truth about our family's legacy. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would unravel the very fabric of our family history, exposing the horrors and sacrifices hidden for decades. With the weight of my grandfather's secrets heavy in my heart, I descended from the attic. The house, once a sanctuary of childhood innocence, now felt like a mausoleum of hidden truths. I needed answers, and the only way was to confront my parents. That evening, after dinner, I gathered the courage to speak up. My voice trembled as I asked, "Mom, Dad, who was Grandpa? Really?" The room fell into an uneasy silence. Their eyes, usually so full of warmth, clouded with a mix of sadness and apprehension. Dad broke the silence. "We were hoping to spare you and Lily from our family's past," he began, his voice heavy with regret. Mom joined in, her eyes moist with unshed tears. They told me a story that echoed the chilling revelations from the diary, but with added layers of personal pain and family struggle. Grandpa, whose real name was Thomas, was indeed a spy during the war. He had been recruited for his linguistic skills and sharp intellect. The operations he was involved in were crucial but came at a great cost. Mom recounted how Grandma, whose real name was Abigail, lived in constant fear during those years, terrified that her husband's double life would bring danger to their doorstep. They described one horrific event in particular, which matched the newspaper clipping I found. In 1945, an operation Grandpa was involved in went horribly wrong, leading to an explosion in a civilian area, resulting in numerous casualties. This incident haunted Grandpa for the rest of his life, filling him with guilt and remorse. This story, set against the backdrop of a seemingly ordinary American family, unravels a dark and complex history rooted in the covert life of the protagonist's grandfather, Thomas. The central focus of this narrative is a tragic event in 1945, which is a turning point in both the grandfather's life and the subsequent family history. In 1945, during the tumultuous period of World War II, Grandpa Thomas was involved in a clandestine operation. His role as a spy was integral to a mission that was crucial to the war effort. The operation required him to infiltrate a civilian area for intelligence gathering, which was a routine yet risky task in the world of espionage. However, the operation took a catastrophic turn. Due to unforeseen complications and possibly a miscalculation on Grandpa Thomas's part, there was an explosion in the civilian area. The narrative details this explosion as not just a blast, but a harrowing event that resulted in widespread destruction. Buildings were demolished, fires raged, and, most tragically, numerous innocent civilians lost their lives. The explosion was not only a physical event, but also a symbol of the devastating impact of war and espionage on innocent lives. In the small, war-torn town of Saint-Mire-Église, France, In the late spring of 1945, an operation was set into motion that would forever change the lives of its inhabitants. The man at the center of this operation was Thomas Callahan, known in intelligence circles as Agent Falcon. A seasoned operative for the Allied forces, Thomas was tasked with a critical mission that, if successful, would significantly impede the German war effort in the region. Thomas, along with his team comprising of Evelyn Raven Moreau, a French resistance fighter, and Jack Hawk Andrews, an explosives expert from the British Special Operations Executive, planned to destroy a hidden cache of German armament located near the town. The intelligence indicated that the cache was housed in an abandoned factory on the outskirts of Saint-Mire-Église, a strategic point of interest for both sides. The operation was set for the night of May 20, 1945. Under the cover of darkness, the team navigated the perilous landscape, avoiding German patrols. Jack had procured the explosives through his contacts in the resistance, a risky but necessary endeavor. The plan was to plant the explosives at critical structural points of the factory, ensuring its complete destruction. However, unbeknownst to Thomas and his team, the Germans had moved the armaments cache. In its place, they housed refugees, families who had been displaced by the war. The intelligence was outdated, a fatal oversight in the fast-paced, high-stakes world of espionage. As the explosives were set and the team retreated to a safe distance, the night was shattered by a deafening explosion. The factory, now a temporary home for innocent civilians, was engulfed in flames. Buildings adjacent to the factory, brittle from the wear of war, crumbled under the force of the blast. Thomas watched in horror as the town descended into chaos. Fires raged uncontrollably, casting an eerie glow on the faces of the town's residents, faces twisted in shock and grief. The air was filled with the sounds of crumbling buildings, crackling flames, and the heart-wrenching cries of those searching for loved ones. The aftermath of this explosion was gruesome. The descriptions might include the chaos in the streets, the cries of the injured, and the grief of those who lost their loved ones. This single event became a turning point in Grandpa Thomas's life. The realization of the consequences of his actions, the loss of innocent lives, haunted him for the rest of his days. The newspaper clipping found by the protagonist in the attic serves as a tangible reminder of this dark past. It probably featured headlines about the tragedy, perhaps with a black and white photograph of the destruction, and an account of the incident that aligns with the grandfather's diary entries. This clipping was not just a piece of paper, but a portal into a past that was carefully hidden from the family. This incident instilled a profound sense of guilt and remorse in Grandpa Thomas. His diary entries, as discovered by the protagonist, likely conveyed deep emotional turmoil. He might have written about his nightmares, his struggles with the memories of that day, and his constant questioning of his own morals and decisions. His life post, 1945, was overshadowed by this guilt, affecting his behavior and relationships with his family. The event also had a ripple effect on the family. The protagonist's parents lived with the burden of this secret, impacting their decisions and the way they raised their children. This secret history of their grandfather's involvement in such a tragic event brought a new understanding of their family's past and the complexities of moral choices in times of war. The revelation deepened when Dad shared how this dark legacy affected them directly. In the late 1970s, when he was just a teenager, their family was threatened. People who had suffered because of Grandpa's actions sought revenge. My parents had to flee their home in the middle of the night, changing their identities, moving from one place to another. This explained the fragmented stories of their past, the gaps in our family history that were always glossed over. Mom and Dad had hoped to leave this painful legacy behind, to give Lily and me a normal life. But the past has a way of catching up, and now, here we were, confronting the ghosts that had been lurking in the shadows all along. As they spoke, I felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, disbelief. But there was also a sense of understanding, a realization of the immense burden my parents had carried all these years. Our family, I understood, was shaped by a complex tapestry of secrets and sacrifices. That night, I lay in bed, the images and stories swirling in my mind. I realized that the history I had uncovered was not just about the past. It was a living part of us, an indelible mark on our family's soul. The horror of what happened was not just in the events themselves, but in the ripple effects that followed, shaping the lives of those who came after. As dawn broke, I knew that our family's journey through this dark past was far from over. The revelations in the attic were just the beginning. The true challenge lay in coming to terms with these truths and understanding how they would shape our future. The days following the revelation were heavy with a newfound understanding of our family's history. My parents, once the keepers of a somber legacy, now seemed more vulnerable, their faces etched with the scars of a past they had struggled to shield us from. The more we talked, the clearer the picture became of how deeply Grandpa Thomas's actions had impacted our family. My parents recounted their experiences of persecution, a haunting tale that began in their youth. In the wake of Grandpa's espionage activities, they faced threats and hostility from those affected by his actions. In the late 1970s, when my parents were still young, the situation escalated dangerously. Our family became the target of vengeance-seeking individuals who had discovered Grandpa's role in the tragic events of the war. We were no strangers to moving, changing addresses like one would change clothes, but the reason behind it was far more sinister than I had ever imagined. One particular incident stood out, a night etched in my parents' memories. An angry mob, fueled by loss and betrayal, had gathered outside our family home. My parents, then just teenagers, were hastily awakened by their own parents. They fled under the cover of darkness, leaving behind everything they knew and loved. It was a chilly October night in 1978 in the small town of Bedford, Indiana. The Callahan family, descendants of the once revered war hero Thomas Callahan, were about to face a night of terror that would haunt them for generations. Michael Callahan, a high school history teacher, and his wife, Catherine, a nurse at the local hospital, had built a quiet life with their two teenage children, John and Emily. The family lived in a modest, two-story house on Maple Street, a home filled with love, laughter, and the comforting routine of suburban life. But beneath this veneer of normalcy lay a dark secret, the legacy of Thomas Callahan's actions during World War II. In the years following the war, whispers of Thomas's involvement in a tragic incident had circulated, but nothing concrete had ever surfaced. However, in the late 1970s, a group of individuals deeply affected by the war began to piece together the past. They were relatives of the civilians who perished in the explosion that Thomas had inadvertently caused. Fueled by a mix of grief and a desire for retribution, they formed a coalition seeking justice for their lost loved ones. The group was led by Henri Leclerc, a Frenchman whose family had been among those who died in Saint-Mire-Église. Henri, a journalist by profession, had dedicated years to investigating the incident, driven by a need to uncover the truth and hold those responsible accountable. On the night of October 15, 1978, this group, now resembling an angry mob, descended upon the Callahan residence. Their faces, contorted by years of sorrow and anger, were illuminated by the torches they carried. The peaceful night air was pierced by their cries for justice. Inside the house, Michael and Catherine were jolted awake by the commotion. Peering through the curtains, they saw the mob, and fear gripped their hearts. They knew the truth about Thomas's past, a secret they had hoped to bury for the sake of their children. Acting swiftly, Michael instructed John and Emily to pack a few belongings. There was no time for questions, no time for tears. The family had to escape, to evade the wrath of those wronged by a man they had never known. Under the cloak of darkness, the Callahan family slipped out through the back door, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and desperation. They made their way to the family car parked in the alley behind their house. As they drove away, the sounds of the mob echoed in the night, a haunting reminder of the past's inescapable shadow. They traveled through the night, leaving behind the only home John and Emily had ever known. By dawn, they had reached the outskirts of Chicago, where they sought refuge with a distant relative. The family assumed new identities, a necessary measure to protect themselves from further retribution. The incident marked the beginning of a life on the run for the Callahan family. Over the years, they moved from city to city, state to state, each move a painful reminder of the legacy left behind by Thomas. The family grappled with the dichotomy of his heroism and the unintended consequences of his actions, a burden that would shape their lives for years to come. This pattern of fleeing, of looking over their shoulders, became a recurring theme in their lives. They lived under aliases, their true identities buried under layers of fabricated stories and forged documents. My father, once known as Michael, became John, and my mother, Catherine, became Emily. Their tale of survival was a tapestry of fear, resilience, and the unyielding love of parents who wanted nothing more than to protect their children from the sins of the past. They spoke of how these experiences shaped them, the decisions they made, and the way they raised Lily and me. As I listened, a profound sadness washed over me. I grieved for the childhood my parents never had, for the peace they could never fully enjoy. But amidst the sorrow, there was a growing sense of admiration for their strength and determination. This legacy of fear and flight left an indelible mark on our family. It explained the unspoken anxiety that always lingered in their eyes, the reason behind our seemingly rootless existence. Our family history was not just a tale of espionage and betrayal, it was a story of survival against the odds, of a family's relentless pursuit of a normal life amidst the chaos of a past they had no control over. Now, as the sun set on another day, I sat with my family, united by a truth that had long been hidden. We were the living aftermath of Grandpa Thomas's choices, a testament to the enduring impact of his actions. Our family's journey through the shadows of the past was far from over, but we faced it together, with a newfound understanding and a shared resolve to emerge from the darkness. As I reflected on the tumultuous journey of my family's past, a strange sense of calm enveloped me. The revelations from Grandpa Thomas's diary, the stories of flight and fear, and the deep scars left behind had changed the fabric of our family. Yet, in this newfound clarity, there was a peculiar sense of liberation. I pondered the choices Grandpa made, the duality of his existence as a loving family man and a spy entangled in a web of espionage and moral dilemmas. His actions, though marred by darkness, were driven by a sense of duty, a commitment to a cause he believed was greater than himself. It made me wonder about the complex nature of right and wrong, the gray areas where personal and political motives intertwine. My parents, too, had their share of difficult choices. Their decision to hide the truth from Lily and me was rooted in protection, a desire to spare us the burden of our family's legacy. This protective shield, though well-intentioned, had its own consequences. Yet, as I looked at them, their eyes telling stories of untold struggles, I couldn't help but feel that they did the best they could under the circumstances. The impact of Grandpa's actions on our family was profound. We were shaped by the shadows of his past, molded by the need to conceal and survive. Our family's story was one of resilience, a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure and adapt. It taught me the importance of understanding and empathy, the need to look beyond the surface to the complexities that define the human experience. As we moved forward, there was a silent agreement to embrace our history, to acknowledge the pain and learn from it. We realized that while we couldn't change the past, we could shape our future, breaking the cycle of fear and secrecy. In the end, our family's saga was a reminder of the enduring impact of our choices, the ripple effects that span generations. It was a story of redemption, of finding light in the darkest of places. And though the journey was fraught with heartache, it brought us closer, binding us with the unbreakable ties of shared history and newfound understanding. As I close this chapter of our family story, I turn to you, the reader. Write in the comments below the video, what do you think about this story? Have you ever been in a similar situation in your life? I remember the summer of 2011 in the sleepy suburb where we lived, a place that seemed untouched by time or turmoil. Our house, a quaint Victorian-era relic, stood out with its peeling paint and creaky porch nestled at the end of Maple Street. I was just a boy then, naive and curious, with my world revolving around school, friends, and family. My parents, Emily and George, were the anchors of my existence. Dad, a quiet man, worked at the local bank, his life a routine of numbers and ledgers. Mom, with her soothing voice and warm smile, was a nurse at the community hospital. Our lives were simple but comfortable, filled with the mundane bliss of suburban life. Weekends were reserved for family gatherings. Our house buzzed with laughter and chatter as aunts, uncles, and cousins filled the rooms. Uncle Jack, Dad's younger brother, was always the life of the party, his boisterous laughter echoing through the halls. Aunt Sarah, Mom's sister, would fuss over everyone, her culinary skills the highlight of every gathering. My bedroom was my sanctuary, a small attic room with a sloping ceiling and a window overlooking the elm tree in our backyard. The walls were adorned with posters of baseball stars and astronauts, dreams of a boy untouched by the harsher realities of life. My favorite spot was the old rocking chair by the window, where I'd sit for hours, lost in the pages of adventure novels. But that summer, everything changed. It started innocently enough, with a cleaning spree. Mom decided it was time to declutter the attic, a repository of forgotten memories and dusty heirlooms. Amidst the boxes of old clothes and toys, I stumbled upon a locked trunk, its metal clasps rusted, its leather surface cracked with age. Curiosity got the better of me. I fetched a screwdriver from Dad's toolbox and pried open the lock. Inside, I found a trove of old documents, yellowed photographs, and a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age. The photos showed relatives I had never met, their expressions solemn, their eyes harboring untold stories. But it was the journal that drew me in, its handwritten pages filled with entries that spoke of dark secrets and a haunting past. The first entry was dated back to 1921, the handwriting elegant but shaky. It chronicled the life of a relative, Henry, whose name I had never heard before. As I delved deeper into the journal, I discovered a terrifying truth. Henry, desperate and indebted to a notorious gang, had made a pact with the underworld, a deal that seemed to cast a long, dark shadow over our family. My hands trembled as I read about the unspeakable horrors that followed, events so chilling they seemed to leap off the pages and into the quiet of my attic room. I couldn't believe that my family, the epitome of normalcy, could be linked to such a macabre past. That night, I lay in bed, the moon casting ghostly shadows across my room. The innocence of my childhood felt shattered, replaced by a gnawing fear of the skeletons lurking in our family closet. Little did I know that this was just the beginning of a journey that would unravel the very fabric of my existence. As the days passed, the weight of the discovery in the attic consumed me. I could barely focus at school, my mind constantly drifting back to the haunting words of Henry's journal. The mundane chatter of my classmates seemed trivial, a stark contrast to the grim reality hidden within my family's history. Determined to uncover the full extent of Henry's misdeeds, I pored over the journal every night, the dim light of my desk lamp casting long shadows across the pages. The more I read, the more the horrors unfolded. Henry, overwhelmed by his debts to the gang, had agreed to a series of ghastly acts to settle his dues. He became an unwilling pawn in their malevolent schemes, carrying out tasks that were morally reprehensible and legally damning. The journal detailed specific incidents with chilling precision. One entry, dated March of 1923, recounted a night when Henry was forced to assist in a sinister ritual held in an abandoned warehouse in Chicago. The gang, dabbling in dark practices, sought to invoke powers beyond their understanding, using Henry as a conduit for their wicked intentions. Another entry, from the summer of 1924, described a harrowing event in New York City. Henry was tasked with delivering a mysterious package to a shadowy figure in an alleyway near the docks. The contents of the package were never revealed, but the fear in Henry's writing was palpable. He knew he was entangled in something far beyond his control, a web of darkness that threatened to consume not just him but his entire lineage. As I read, the pieces began to fall into place. The strange occurrences in our family, the unexplained misfortunes that seemed to follow us, suddenly made sense. We were living under the shadow of Henry's actions, a legacy of an ancestral debt to a malevolent force that refused to let go. I also found old photographs tucked between the journal's pages. They showed places and people, all linked to the gruesome events Henry was part of. There was a faded picture of the warehouse in Chicago, its windows boarded up, an aura of dread emanating from the very image. Another photo showed a group of stern-faced individuals, their eyes cold and calculating, standing in front of what looked like a secret meeting place. The journal and the photographs were evidence of a past soaked in terror and moral decay. But it wasn't just history, it was a reality that was still affecting us. I realized with a sinking heart that my family and I were still paying the price for Henry's actions. One evening, unable to bear the burden of this secret any longer, I decided to confront my parents. The dining room was quiet, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I laid the journal and the photographs on the table, watching as their expressions turned from curiosity to shock, then to a deep, unspeakable understanding. "It's time you told me the truth," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, about Henry, about the pact, and about how it's affecting us today. My parents exchanged a look, a silent communication that spoke volumes. That night, they began to unravel the threads of our family's dark legacy, a tale of terror that had been hidden for generations but was now coming to light, threatening to engulf us all. The night I confronted my parents, the air in our living room was thick with tension, a silent storm brewing in the heart of our family home. As they began to speak, their voices were a mixture of sorrow and resignation, a testament to the heavy burden they had borne for years. My father, his usual stoic demeanor giving way to a pained vulnerability, started the tale. "Henry was my great-uncle, your great-great-uncle," he began, his eyes fixed on the worn journal. "The family rarely spoke of him, and now you know why. His dealings with the gang and the dark pact he made cast a long shadow over us." My mother took over, her nurse's composure struggling against the emotional tide. After Henry's involvement with the gang, strange things began happening. Accidents, unexplained illnesses, a string of misfortunes that seemed to follow the family like a curse. They told me about a specific incident, one that had haunted them since their youth. In 1978, my grandparents, desperate to free themselves from the lingering curse, sought the help of a medium. They held a seance in an old house on the outskirts of Boston, hoping to contact Henry's spirit and seek closure. The seance, however, went horribly wrong. A fire broke out suddenly, engulfing the room in flames. My grandparents barely escaped, but the medium wasn't so lucky. My grandparents, Alice and Thomas Bennett, carried the weight of a family curse that stretched back generations. It was in the fall of 1978, specifically on the mist-laden evening of October 14th, that they decided to confront this shadowy legacy head-on. Their desperation led them to the door of Madame Alera, a renowned medium in the Boston area, known for her deep connections to the spirit world. Madame Alera resided in an antiquated Victorian mansion on the outskirts of Boston, a place rumored among locals to be touched by the supernatural. The mansion, cloaked in ivy, had a foreboding air, with its darkened windows and the eerie creaking of its aged structure. Alice, a schoolteacher with a gentle demeanor, and Thomas, a local hardware store owner known for his pragmatic approach to life, felt a chill run down their spines as they approached. Inside, the mansion was a labyrinth of shadowy hallways and rooms filled with relics of the past. Madame Alera, a woman in her late 60s with piercing blue eyes, greeted them in the foyer. Her presence was both comforting and unsettling, a duality that seemed to permeate the entire house. They were led to a small, dimly lit room at the back of the mansion where the seance was to take place. The room was adorned with heavy, velvet curtains and antique furniture, the air heavy with the scent of burning sage. A circular table sat in the center, surrounded by a ring of old, cushioned chairs. As the clock struck 9 p.m., they sat down, joining hands around the table. Madame Alara, her voice a soothing yet eerie melody, began to recite incantations in a language that seemed ancient and otherworldly. Alice and Thomas, skeptics by nature but driven by a need for closure, closed their eyes, hoping to finally contact the spirit of Henry, the ancestor believed to have initiated the family's misfortunes. The air in the room grew colder, and a sense of anticipation hung heavily around them. Suddenly, a low rumble filled the room, as if the house itself was responding to Madame Alara's calls. Then, an ethereal voice echoed through the room, a voice that claimed to be Henry's, filled with sorrow and regret. It was at that moment that disaster struck. A candle on a nearby shelf tipped over, its flame catching onto the velvet drapes. Within seconds, the room was engulfed in flames. Panic ensued as Alice and Thomas scrambled towards the door, the heat and smoke blinding them. Madame Alara, caught in a trance, seemed oblivious to the danger. Thomas, with his inherent bravery, rushed back into the inferno, his arms wrapping around the medium in an attempt to drag her to safety. However, the fire was too fierce, and he was forced to retreat, suffering minor burns in the process. They managed to escape the burning mansion, but Madame Alara was not so fortunate. The fire brigade arrived quickly, but the flames had consumed much of the old mansion, taking Madame Alara with it. The news of the tragic seance fire made headlines in Boston, shrouded in mystery and speculation. Alice and Thomas were forever changed by that night. They bore not only the scars of their escape, but also the guilt of Madame Alara's tragic fate. The seance that was meant to bring closure only deepened their curse, leaving them with more questions than answers and a haunting memory that would linger for the rest of their lives. The mansion, once a symbol of Boston's historic elegance, lay in ruins, a charred shell that stood as a grim reminder of the night when the veil between worlds was torn asunder, claiming more than just the physical. My parents also recounted the chilling events of 1985 in our very suburb. They had just moved into our family home, young and hopeful, but their happiness was short-lived. One night, they experienced what could only be described as a supernatural intrusion. Shadows moved of their own accord, and disembodied whispers filled the rooms. My father, a pragmatic man, had always dismissed such tales, but that night, he saw and heard things that defied explanation. The curse, it seems, didn't end with Henry, my mother said, her voice trembling. It lasted onto the family, a debt passed down through generations. We tried to shield you from it, to give you a normal childhood. I listened, my heart sinking with each revelation. The normalcy of our life was a facade, hiding a legacy of darkness. The journal, the photographs, they were not just remnants of a forgotten past, but symbols of a present still overshadowed by Henry's misdeeds. My father sighed, a sound of defeat and weariness. We've done everything we could to protect you, to break away from this curse. But it seems that the past isn't easily forgotten, nor its debts easily repaid. That night, I lay in bed, the revelations echoing in my mind. My childhood memories, once bright and carefree, now seemed tainted, overshadowed by a history I could neither change nor fully comprehend. The ghost of Henry and his sinister pact lingered in the shadows, a reminder of a debt that was still being exacted from us, generation after generation. In the days that followed, my family's history, once veiled in secrecy, began to unravel further, revealing the depths of our ancestral curse. My parents shared more about the challenges they faced, tracing back to the dark legacy left by Henry. They recounted the late 1980s, a period marked by an intensity of misfortune. My father was unjustly implicated in a financial scandal at his bank, a ploy he believed was orchestrated by remnants of the gang seeking retribution or by the unyielding curse itself. We were ostracized, whispers and wary glances following us wherever we went. The stress took its toll on my mother's health, leading to prolonged illnesses that doctors struggled to explain. In 1991, when I was just a toddler, our situation reached a breaking point. One night, our home was vandalized, sinister graffiti staining the walls, windows shattered, a clear message from those who had not forgotten Henry's pact. It was a warning, a reminder that the past was still very much alive. Fearing for our safety and sanity, my parents decided to flee. We moved under the cover of night, leaving behind everything we knew. The new town offered a semblance of peace, but the shadow of our past was never far behind. My parents changed their names, hoping to sever the last threads connecting us to Henry's dark legacy. It was a dark and unsettling period for my family in the spring of 1991. I was barely 3 years old, a toddler unaware of the shadows that loomed over our family. My parents, Laura and Michael Thompson, were living in a modest, single-story house in a quiet suburb of Salem, Massachusetts. The house, with its cozy living room and wallpapered hallways, had been a haven of normalcy, or so my parents had hoped. Michael worked as an accountant in a local firm, while Laura, a former elementary school teacher, had taken a break to raise me. They had done everything to distance themselves from the haunting legacy of my great-great-uncle Henry and his nefarious pact. But the past, as they soon learned, refused to stay buried. The breaking point came on the night of May 15th. Our family had settled into an uneasy sleep when the sound of shattering glass jolted my parents awake. Rushing to the living room, they were met with a scene of chaos. The windows were smashed, and the walls were defaced with sinister graffiti, cryptic symbols and threats that spoke of Henry's unresolved pact with the underworld. A cold fear gripped them as they realized the extent of the danger we were in. It was a stark message from unknown assailants, a reminder that the dark past they so desperately wanted to forget was still very much alive and vengeful. With no time to waste, my parents made a harrowing decision. Fearing for our safety and sanity, they decided we had to flee. Under the cover of night, we hastily packed the essentials, a few clothes, some family photos, and my favorite stuffed bear. Leaving behind the broken windows and the graffiti-stained walls, we slipped away from our home, the place where I had taken my first steps and spoken my first words. We traveled through the night, the car's headlights cutting through the fog that had settled over the roads. Our destination was a small town in upstate New York, a place where no one knew us, and we could start anew. Upon arriving, my parents took the drastic step of changing our names. Michael became David Moore, and Laura adopted the name Sarah. They hoped that in doing so, we could sever the last threads tying us to Henry's dark legacy. The new names were a symbolic break from the past, a desperate attempt to protect their only child from the ominous forces that had hounded our family for generations. The new town, with its tree-lined streets and friendly neighbors, offered a semblance of peace. Yet, the shadow of our past was never far behind. The fear and secrecy that enveloped our lives were a constant reminder of the journey we had undertaken and the invisible burden we carried. As I grew older, I would come to learn of that fateful night in 1991, a night that marked a turning point in our lives. The vandalism of our home in Salem was not just an act of destruction. It was a pivotal event that uprooted us from our lives and set us on a path shrouded in mystery and caution, forever running from the unseen legacy of a past we could not escape. I grew up oblivious to these events, my parents' protective veil shielding me from the grim realities. But their efforts couldn't erase the taint of our bloodline. Unexplained occurrences peppered my childhood, fleeting shadows in the corner of my eye, eerie whispers in the dead of night, and an unshakable feeling of being watched. As my parents recounted these events, the pieces of my fragmented childhood began to align. The sudden moves, the unspoken fears, the look of worry that often clouded their faces, all were now painted in the stark colors of truth. The burden of the past was a heavy yoke around our necks, a relentless pursuer from which we could never truly escape. My father, once a man of logic and reason, had succumbed to the belief that we were doomed to bear the consequences of Henry's sins. My mother, with her unwavering strength, held on to a fragile hope that we could somehow break free from the cycle. As I listened, a mixture of anger and sorrow welled up inside me. Our family, once a symbol of normalcy and love, was marred by an inescapable legacy. We were living in the aftermath of a horror story, characters, and a tale of caution and despair. The revelation of our family's past was a turning point in my life. It explained so much, yet left me with an ocean of questions. How could we rid ourselves of this ancestral curse? Was there a way to right the wrongs of the past? Or were we destined to be haunted by the shadows of Henry's deeds forever? As I lay in bed that night, the past and present merged into a single, haunting narrative. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison, its walls echoing with the whispers of a past that refused to die. The story of Henry and his pact with darkness was not just a chapter in our family history. It was the very fabric of our existence, woven with threads of fear, sorrow, and an unending debt. In the wake of the revelations, our family was enveloped in a cloud of introspection and quiet despair. Yet, amidst the turmoil, a resilient flame of determination began to ignite within me. I could not, would not, accept that our lives were to be forever shackled by the sins of a long-dead relative. One evening, as we gathered in the living room, the air thick with unspoken fears, I voiced this newfound resolve. We can't let Henry's actions define us forever. There has to be a way to break this cycle, to free ourselves from this curse. My parents, worn by the years of running and hiding, looked at me with a mixture of skepticism and hope. "We've tried, son," my father said, his voice heavy with defeat. "But some chains might be too strong to break." But I was undeterred. "Then we'll try again together. We can't let fear dictate our lives anymore." In the weeks that followed, we embarked on a journey of healing and discovery. We researched old rituals of cleansing and redemption, consulted experts in paranormal activity, and even reached out to distant relatives who might shed more light on Henry's pact. Each step was a move towards confronting our past rather than fleeing from it. During this time, we learned more about Henry, the man, not just the architect of our curse. In his youth, he was much like any of us, full of dreams and aspirations. It was his desperation and subsequent poor choices that led him down a dark path. Understanding this humanized him, making the horror a bit more tangible, a bit more understandable. This journey of understanding and confrontation culminated in a night that would forever be etched in our memories. We returned to the old house on Maple Street, the very place where our family's dark legacy had begun. With the help of a spiritual guide, we conducted a ritual of closure and forgiveness, reaching out to the spirits bound by Henry's pact. As we chanted and the candles flickered, a surreal peace descended upon us. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of release, as if the house itself was exhaling years of pent-up sorrow. For the first time in years, we felt a genuine hope, a belief that the chains of the past could finally be broken. We left Maple Street with lighter hearts, though aware that some scars would always remain. Our journey had taught us the power of facing our fears, of confronting the past to shape a different future. As I reflect on these events, I realize that our story is one of resilience and redemption. We were not just passive victims of a curse. We were a family that fought back against the shadows. The experience has left me with a profound belief in the strength of the human spirit and the power of love to overcome even the darkest legacies. Our story is a testament to the fact that, while we cannot change the past, we have the power to shape our destiny through courage, understanding, and forgiveness. And so, as we move forward, we do so with the knowledge that the chains of the past have been broken, and the shadows of old, while never fully gone, no longer hold power over us. As I conclude this chapter of our family's story, I turn to you, the reader. Write in the comments below the video, what do you think about this story? Have you ever been in a similar situation in your life?